आज भारत की वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था में जो स्थिति बनी है, उसके कारण विश्व का ध्यान भी भारत के इस बजट सत्र पर है। पिछले कई दिनों से लगातार सभी दलों से विचार विमर्श चल रहा है। अब तक जितनी भी मीटिंगें हुई हैं, सभी विपक्ष के साथियों ने जो सकारात्मक रुख दिखाया है, आज से प्रारंभ हो रहे सत्र में और आने वाले दिनों में उसका पूरा एहसास देशवासियों को जरूर होगा।
All right, that is Prime Minister Modi speaking right ahead of the budget session and essentially putting it on record that the world is watching the progress of the session, considering the past two sessions have been a complete washout. And investors across the world and even in India would want to know what is the progress that legislators together can make in Parliament. And who better than my three very special guests joining us right here on the politics of the budget session. And we'll begin with the ruling benches. So Mr. N.K. Singh of the BJP, Mr. Ashwini Kumar of the Congress Party, and representing the Biju Janata Dal here, Mr. Jay Panda. Thanks each one of you for being with us. Let's first set the context of the show. And the context of the show is how crucial is this session? Many people believe this is the make or break budget session for the Modi government. Mr. Singh, you represent the ruling benches. Do you essentially agree with that argument?
Well, I think that this is a very important session. This budget is significant. It is to consolidate the significant gains India has made in catapulting itself to a very high growth trajectory. It is significant from the viewpoint of how to give this ongoing growth momentum a further impetus in enacting some important legislations, in laying the framework in the budget of making India a genuinely competitive destination, being able to rekindle private investment, and of course to be able to continue to attract large foreign investments, on continue the process of the ease of business and competitive federalism to get really also the states involved and to really make sure that the rural demand picks up. It has suffered on account of two successive droughts, and the strategy to get India's agricultural sector going would also be a centerpiece which would be watched carefully.
You're talking pure economics, but the context seems to be rather different here in New Delhi, and which is why I'm first going to take it across to the neutral observer Jay Panda on my show. And Jay, essentially, do you believe this is testing time for the Modi government, this budget session, and how it progresses?
Well, I think every budget is important, but you're right, this is a particularly crucial budget because there has been a sense that the government's ambitious agenda has mostly been stuck in Parliament and a lot more needs to be done. And this is crucial because by the end of this year, the government will be reaching midpoint of its tenure. Now, for the past year and a half, there has been a discussion that GST must be passed, and there is a broad consensus, but we still haven't reached that full consensus to make it pass. So that's a very important issue, but that's, I think, the ultimate objective. There are many other objectives that need to be achieved in this budget. You heard the Prime Minister talk about boosting the rural economy, and there has been talk that there will be a greater fillip given to programs such as NREGA and also to the Food Security Act. Now, this will have implications on the fiscal deficit, which itself has implications for our country rating and the rupee exchange rate. Now, which means that many other items also will need to get prioritized. So last thing I want to say is GST is very important, but it's not the only thing. Just to give you a flavor of at least two other important bills that are pending. One is the real estate regulator. That market needs to get sorted out. Another one is the national waterways, in which a lot of progress has been made. For instance, in coastal areas like Odisha, for waterway-based logistics and freight movement. But unless these things get past Parliament, we will see some delays. But I am hopeful. Final thing I want to say is, today there seems to be some agreement that the Parliament will function, but a special arrangement has been made to discuss the JNU-related issues immediately after the railway budget, rather than, as is normal, to discuss a vote of thanks on the President's motion. So with this sort of IPO-making agreement to give ground to the opposition's concerns, hopefully we can get off to a good start.
That's an optimistic note. Hopefully we can get off to a good start, and it looks like the government is in a conciliatory mode. They are willing to discuss some of the issues that are being raised by the opposition. Mr. Kumar, since you represent the main opposition here, the Congress party, the government is making provisions to discuss the JNU row. Given that entire context that we are seeing outside on the streets and not in Parliament, how hopeful are you of doing some legislation within the House?
Well, I'm not in a position to comment about the legislation, but I can certainly tell you that considering the state of the nation today, there are many, many pressing issues of fundamental importance, the way India was conceived, our idea of India, all of that seems to be under siege now. And I think the priority is going to be to discuss where we are going as a nation. That is why the JNU incident, which has to be seen in the broader context of fundamental freedoms and the myopic view of nationalism that is being touted in the past several days. These are some of the issues. The violence consequent upon the reservations issue in Haryana. Within 2 days we saw almost all of North India engulfed in a kind of violence which is a result of an impotent rage, as one of my journalist friends termed it. These are issues that tell us that something is not right with our society and the state of the nation. It almost looks as if the nation is at war with itself. Not a single segment of Indian society seems to be satisfied. Something has gone terribly wrong. And I think Parliament is the right forum to discuss what has gone wrong and what is the way forward. Of course, Parliament must legislate. Parliament must carry out a legislative reform agenda or legislative agenda of the government, and also the private members bill and any such issue that is of importance to the country. But it goes without saying that the principal responsibility for making Parliament function in its right spirit rests with the government of the day. It is for them to create an atmosphere that is conducive to debate, conducive to legislation, conducive to consensus, in an atmosphere which will demonstrate the strength of India's democracy. And I think what I see around me, what I feel as a citizen, I don't think that the mood of the nation is right. And if the mood of the nation is not right, the mood in Parliament cannot be right.
Mr. Singh, will you concede at one level that, and your worst critics are going to grant you that many efforts have been made to revive the economy, many efforts have been made to unclog the system, so to say, but somehow what's happening other than economic activities has been a bit of a distraction for the government, has taken the focus away from what perhaps would have been a good report card, if not the best marks?
Well, let me say this, that you know, the Prime Minister was the first one to really fully concede that all issues, some of which have been articulated by Ashwini-ji, government would be fully prepared to discuss some of these issues in Parliament. I do not disagree with Ashwini that Parliament is the right forum to discuss this. But where I do slightly want to nuance what he said, apart from the substantive content where I disagree with him, is the fact that the responsibility for Parliament to function no doubt rests with the Treasury bench and with the party which is in office, but it is really a joint responsibility of the opposition of all parties which are there, and of course under the leadership of the Treasury bench. So I think it is a joint responsibility of the Treasury bench and all other parties for Parliament to enact legislation, and I'm glad Ashwini mentioned that Parliament has an obligation to enact legislation. And I hope that after some of these issues have been discussed thoroughly and to the satisfaction of all parties concerned, that the fact that this is the budget session of Parliament, there are very important financial legislations which are pending, and that apart from the railway budget and the debate on the general budget, the debate on the President's motion of thanks, which was full of important economic and social issues, that Parliament would have also time, apart from the passage of these, to debate and discuss and hopefully enact important pending financial legislations.
Mr. Kumar, I want to come to you because we've seen two sessions being washed out. It was Lalit Gate once and it were other issues in the second time around. But 32 business items have been prioritized. There are 12 bills for consideration and passage, 4 bills for introduction, consideration, passage, and of course, that includes the Finance Bill 2016. Where does the onus for reforms lie? Because many people are now wondering if Parliament is the highest seat of decision making, who is going to legislate? We're seeing the fate of the GST hang in balance because the principal opposition and the main ruling party cannot come to a consensus. Where does the onus for reform lies? It's all right to say that the onus for running the house lies on the government, but where does the onus for reform lie?
Look, the onus for reform or the onus for legislation primarily rests with the government of the day, the Treasury benches, as my friend N.K. Singh says. It is no doubt a joint responsibility in the sense that it takes two to tango. But the point I was making, and which I want to reiterate now, is that it is for the government and the Treasury benches to engage with the opposition such as would create a conducive atmosphere for a healthy, civilized discourse and debate. There is no alternative in a civilized democracy to debate and to discussion. After all, democracy is a contestation of ideas. But in the scheme of the things today, in the scheme of what is happening all around us, my sense is that what will be of paramount importance, even as a subject of debate in the country and in Parliament, will be the attacks on the fundamental constitutional values that we all cherish, regardless of our political affiliations. The JNU debate is not only a debate about the arrest of one individual, it is a debate about the limits of tolerance in our country. It is a debate about rationality being the last defense in any civilized democracy. It is about a contestation between myopic view of nationalism and constitutionalism, and the two are absolutely not separate. Therefore, I personally believe that when time is left after we have debated all these things, surely whatever will then be the mood of Parliament, the Parliament will try and do whatever best it can. And let me tell you, this perception that parliamentarians do not want to work is completely wrong. Parliamentarians at the end of the day are committed to their work, but also the BJP legitimized at one point of time non-debate as a legitimate form of protest even within Parliament. Not that I agree with this, or not that I want to repeat what
So
they
you
said.
want the disruption bit in just a wait. I will come to you. I will come to you on the disruption bit and whether it is a legitimate form of protest or not. I know you're going to quote Mr. Jaitley there, but I want to get in Mr. Panda here. And you know, Mr. Panda, like Mr. Ashwini Kumar has been saying, the mood of the nation, and Mr. N.K. Singh made a reference to it as well. Do you believe in some sense the government has almost walked itself into this controversy the way it was so clumsily handled by the government? It's a sensitive issue indeed. It could have perhaps been handled a little more efficiently, a little more sensitively, if I may, the whole JNU row. You believe the government has almost landed itself into a soup here?
Clearly, the government should have handled this with greater sensitivity. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But let's take a look at the bigger picture with some dispassionate analysis. None of these issues are completely new for India. There was mention of the Jat riots. I would remind you that even in the previous government, there were the Gujar riots and blockades, if you remember. We are talking about the issue of JNU and freedom of speech. Now let's remember that even in the previous government, young ladies and cartoonists were arrested because of expressing themselves. These are not new things. Now clearly, what happened in JNU was handled clumsily, in my opinion. Nobody condones the kind of anti-national slogans that one heard, but atmosphere has been vitiated by reports of doctored videos and all that. And I think the police perhaps could have done a better job of homework and then moved in. So this I think comes in the way. But I don't want to fall into the trap of saying that unless each of these issues is addressed, we should not do anything about the economy. And I think that's foolish. Ashwini Kumar is right that the BJP, when it was in opposition, also indulged in disruption. But I think they should now recognize, that is the Congress and its allies should recognize, that being in the opposition today, they have the chance of setting a new standard, and they are missing that option so far. But I hope that we can make progress, because there is a large section of the country, certainly most of your viewers are, I think, very, very unhappy at the way in which Parliament is functioning. And it's all right to say that we MPs mean well and we want to work, but there is no smoke without some fire. And the reality is that Parliament has been mostly dysfunctional for the past year and a half.
That's a very valid argument indeed, that people are very anxious not just about the budget but actually how the budget session progresses, because there is anxiety, at least in the community that we cater to, that politicians can't see eye to eye when it comes to economic reforms. Mr. Kumar, I will come to you. And the reference that you were making about disruption being a legitimate form of protest in a democracy, that argument does hold good. But if you protest for too long and if you obstruct for too long, public opinion can also go against you. And that's a risk that the Congress party is indeed running, especially on issues like the GST.
Well, let me answer my good friend Jay Panda first. I don't think Jay is right when he says that you have a dispassionate political debate. Politics is always a function of passion, and people hold certain views with great passion and they espouse their cause with great passion, as indeed should be the case. So I don't think I can understand him saying that it should be an objective debate. Yes, but there's always passion attached to debate. And therefore, every passionate debate doesn't necessarily cloud reason. And you can be both rational and passionate. Now, let me tell you that it is the Congress party who brought in the GST bill. It is the Congress party who has told the government repeatedly on every single occasion whenever there was a semblance of discussion that we would like to engage with you constructively. Here are our 3 issues and we want you to settle those issues. Till date, not a single concrete proposal which could advance the dialogue has been given to us officially. There's been some talk here and there, some out-of-the-cuff suggestions, but that is not the way to take a dialogue further on an important as critical to the nation's economy as the GST. So let BJP not cry over GST, because GST was something that we brought in and the nation wants the GST and it should have a GST. But it can only have a GST as far as we are concerned after our concerns are addressed. We also believe that as far as other key economic legislations are concerned, we have in the past supported them. There have been a number of bills we have helped them to pass even in the last couple of months. But the fact remains, and that's a matter of principle. Do you want to tell the opposition that it is my way or the highway, or do you want to tell the opposition that you are the second most important wheel on which the government will proceed further, and we mean well by you and we respect what you say? They say all the right things, but they do all the wrong things, and then the atmosphere gets vitiated and important things don't happen, and we are not happy about it. But the government cannot evade the primary responsibility for dysfunctionality of Parliament.
I want to get Mr. Singh in here. You're saying on the right things, but you're doing all the wrong things is the principal grounds from your main opposition. But I want to touch upon the GST. I don't want to skirt around the bush, and which is why we must talk about this game-changing legislation. The Congress has put forward 3 demands. It's not willing to budge on that. The government says they will not accept this. What is the fate of the GST then? I mean, every single investor, whether foreign or domestic, has said GST is something they're keeping their hopes hinged on, and if the GST is not a reality, they will not invest in India. That's something as big as what investors are saying. Mr. Singh, can there be some give and take? Can GST be a reality according to you? Are you hopeful?
Well, look, I think that, it would be grossly unfair to say that there has been no effort at a dialogue. There has been no effort to try and reach a middle ground. When it came to really having a cap, for instance, let's talk of these 3 things. First of all, there was the question of having a cap. Now, we appointed the Arvind Subramaniam committee to go into what would be a realistic kind of a cap on the GST. The figures which the Arvind Subramaniam report has come out with is significantly lower than the figure which was being talked of earlier. We are all now talking in terms of an average rate with a higher rate for the demerit goods and a somewhat lower rate for the general goods. The issue of therefore, so that is significantly lower than what had been proposed earlier. Now, the issue really is whether it should be embedded in the Constitution or not. Now, very frankly speaking, Ashwini ji is a lawyer of significant eminence. I have respect for him. I have also, of course, been a Revenue Secretary and worked there. There is no rate of tax which is in the Constitution. There can be an aberration of some rate regard to lawyers' fees and so on which are there, but to think of a tax rate embedded as part of the Constitution is a bizarre idea in my view. Frankly, one via media could be perhaps that just like in the case of excise, the top rate on the excise, which is the ceiling on the excise, is part of the finance bill, and that in order to change that ceiling, parliamentary approval is necessary as part of the finance bill, but below that rate, the government has the liberty to operate on different rates. You cannot have the rate for a GST. You can have one top ceiling, and then within that, of course, depending on the kind of goods, merit goods, or really for mass consumption, or sinful goods, really require different set of taxes. Then the second issue really was a mechanism for how to resolve disputes. Now, on this also there have been numerous proposals. One proposal that Mr. Chidambaram himself had left, whose notes are available on the file, that a mechanism within the council itself to be able to resolve really any disputes which come up. Then this issue of how to deal with the 1% extra interstate taxes. On more than one occasion, the finance minister has demonstrated the willingness of the government to really meet this kind of demand. So I think there has been more than a halfway that government has walked in order to meet the concerns of the principal opposition party based on the Subramanian Committee report and based on the fact that we readily agreed in the spirit of partnership to really go to a select committee whose recommendations have been really taken into account. I agree that government alone is not responsible. It's not the my way or the highway. It's a partnership. And we want the enactment of the GST in India's interest in the spirit of partnership.
Fair point indeed. I will take it across to Jay Panda because he made a mention of the GST in his first answer itself about reforms being stalled. And Mr. Panda, because you have the merit of being a neutral observer here, not from the opposition essentially and not from the treasury benches, not from the Congress or the BJP is what I mean to say. Do you believe there is political will to pass the GST? Because some investors are now beginning to say the political will on both sides is actually missing. If there was political will, they would have had a dialogue and the GST would have been a reality.
Well, one of the arguments that has been made is that the government had not reached out enough to the opposition. And I think a year ago, there was some merit to that argument. But you've seen in the last session, for instance, in the winter session, there were meetings between senior government and the principal opposition leaders. And in the last 1 week, both the Prime Minister and the Honorable Speaker have made repeated efforts to have all-party meetings and also one-on-one meetings with key opposition members. So I think that charge no longer stands, that the government is not willing to reach out. I think we should give it some credit. Now, on the issue of is it taking a rigid stand of my way or the highway, let me remind you that it's not the Congress alone that has had some reservations about the GST. We ourselves, the BJD, had proposed several amendments when the GST was being charted through the Lok Sabha, and some of them were indeed accepted. Now, that's not to say that everything we've proposed has been accepted. I agree with Mr. N.K. Singh that the rate should not be enshrined in the Constitution. That would be very odd, but we should find a way of writing it down somewhere. We have also raised the issue about the 1% tax between manufacturing states and that manufacturing states had wanted, and on that the government has shown a lot of flexibility. I think it has to be recognized that on this particular issue, the principal opposition party is the one that has laid down a rigid sort of three-point agenda, and it's the one that's saying my way or the highway. There ought to be some flexibility on both sides. And we've seen some flexibility in recent times.
I will very quickly take a round of last questions. I urge you, all of you, to be very, very brief. But Mr. Panda, as a quick closing comment, the fact that we're discussing the fate of the budget session, leave alone the budget right now, but the fact that we're discussing the fate of how the budget session will progress, does it in some sense make you believe what a wasted majority this seems to now be, thanks to the principal opposition and the government not seeing eye to eye?
Well, the fact is that there are two houses of parliament, and although there is a majority in the lower house, clearly there is some onus on the opposition in the Rajya Sabha if bills are to pass, and that means that the government does indeed have to negotiate a common ground, and some effort is going on, and let's hope that happens. But the final word I want to leave here is, although I'm somewhat optimistic now that it looks like the Lok Sabha is likely to function because of the agreement on the JNU related discussion first, I have to keep my fingers crossed on whether the major bills that are listed can pass. But the final word I want to say is that there are many, many things that the government can do which is not dependent on Parliament, and I think they have not been very quick on some of them. Just to give you an example, there are lots of kinks in the economy which are anti-competitive. Today you have heard about, for example, Mr. Ratan Tata talking about the hurdle to new airlines scaling up because of the 520 rule.
That's right, yes.
I can think of a dozen such hurdles. For example, in the telecom sector, we still do not allow interconnectivity between internet voice and mobile and landline voice, which is another anti-competitive.
Yes.
There are dozens of such anti-competitive things which can be done away with the stroke of a pen. And if that is done, it would add immensely to the investors' interest in India and the growth of the economy.
I did want to go through the last round, but I've completely run out of time here on this edition of the politics of the budget session, as we discuss and debate the fate of this session and how every investor worth his salt is indeed watching this. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us, Mr. Kumar, Mr. Singh and Mr. Panda. I appreciate you taking time out and joining us right here on ET Now. Thanks, viewers, for tuning in.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.